Hello and welcome to the skating lesson. I'm Dave Lees.
And I'm Jonathan Byer. I'm wearing an old shirt. You are wearing a lovely new shirt, Dave.
Thank you. We were just discussing sizes right before. When you're between sizes, it's always a nightmare. Online shopping. But this is this and that. We are going to be discussing everything going on in the figure skating world. But Jonathan, you were at the Tony Awards last week, and I am so curious because you have been known as the opera snob over the years, and now your partner is in the Broadway world, which is not as highbrow as how we thought of you before. So, and before your partner was in the fashion world with Carolina Herrera and very chic, and your new partner is much more down to earth. So, what is it like being an opera snob in the theater world?
This is something we talk about with the skating too. Right? Like there's so many different types of Broadway. So like, yes, there's like the tap dancing, belting in your face, sort of old school musical theater, which I actually enjoy the most.
Me too. A showgirl, the 42nd Street vibe. Yes.
Yes, give me a nice kick line, give me a tap number, give me some lady doing a heartfelt ballad with a big high note at the end. There's something, it connects with an audience in a different way sometimes because you're not reading the surtitles, because it's more current sometimes the way they can deliver it, and they deliver it at your face. Where opera, it's more like you're observing, like how we used to talk about like Papadakis and Cicerone, perhaps more operatic in 2018 Olympics, and maybe Virtue and Moyer a bit more musical theater, which was more presentational to you. So there's something interesting about it. And of course, Dave and I saw the Tony Award winning musical, Kimberly.
Right. Which I thought was a lovely night. But here's the thing with Broadway people, and you explained something that I didn't fully get, because I tend to know a lot of people in the Broadway world who would say that everything was great, but I didn't realize that they were getting comp tickets. And you were explaining to me about when we see the show with the playbill, that's often for publicity's sake, because I was really wondering if everyone thought that everything was always so great.
Yeah, I think it's just out of respect for the ticket and stuff like that. In the same way, whereas if we had gotten free tickets to Ice Theater of New York, I would have been more inclined to post the program and say I was there and all this sort of stuff. And Kimberly Akimbo, of course, funny because it takes place in New Jersey. There are ice skating scenes in it.
Which I didn't know before. You just said you wanted to see Kimberly Akimbo. I said, sure, yeah.
And then the set was done by David Zinn, who I like very much and know. But when we looked closely in like the bedroom scene, they had pictures of Michelle Kwan in that Stars on Ice or Champions on Ice calendar or whatever it was. There were some cute tie-ins that way.
Yeah, I thought it was a lovely night. I have to be honest, cannot remember a single song. Or really what it was about. Like thinking back, I haven't been in that world since, but it came and went for me. It was a lovely night. It was a great thing. Do I think it was worth as many Tony Awards as it won? No.
Yeah, the ones this season that really sort of entertained me the most were Some Like It Hot, which won a lot of awards. A more like feel good, fun, dancing, jokes, like all this sort of stuff. And the play, that Prima Facie, which that Jodie Comer, who I guess is from Killing Eve, which I have not seen, she won Best Actress, and it was like an Olympic feat. It was a one-woman show for like 100 minutes about this lawyer. And I won't say anything beyond that, but it was just sensational. So those were some of the pieces this year that I did find very powerful. But yeah, when you go so often, some are hits and some less so for me personally.
Yeah, you've really been going. So
yes, I have. And you know what's so funny? It's the same way we talk about when some of this, like the skaters are no longer competing. Are they showing up at the events? Some show up at every nationals, they will go to Skate Americas, they will do this, and some just sort of bail for a little bit. And that's sort of where I am. I don't go to the opera right now because I'm a little like burnt out from my own field that way.
Okay.
So it's nice to get sort of like live theater that I'm enjoying, but that's just not my actual craft all the time. If that makes any sense.
That's okay. I get burnout from watching skating. I don't watch I never watch current skating for enjoyment when we're covering it.
Yeah, it becomes different, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and somehow, especially teaching, sometimes if I go to the opera, I forget to just go and be an audience member and experience the performance as much as I'm analyzing it. And that's what happens also sometimes when we're watching the skating, is I'm trying to take copious notes about things I'm observing instead of just sort of sitting back and taking in the program. And that's something Sandra was talking to us about with that like technical box.
Yeah.
I find it helpful, you know, realizing, okay, this is how that was judged and all this sort of stuff. But she's right, it does keep you in analysis mode instead of sort of zooming out and taking in the program as a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah. It gets tricky that way. But even when we have had certain skaters on, it's always interesting which coaches and skaters that have retired are totally up to snuff with who is skating right now, what they are doing. And other people will come on and be like, who is that? I have to look them up. I haven't been watching. Yeah. So, yeah.
It's so funny. We interviewed Mary Scopfold, who was very up on everything. Incredibly.
That's sort of a surprise to me. I don't know that I would have expected her to have still followed it as closely.
Well, another interesting thing is doing some research. I called some people and I was speaking with Mark Militano and people like that to try to get some backstory, because I wanted to make sure we asked the right questions about some of the earlier skaters in their career. Like everyone knows about Paul and Nancy, but you know, Mary was married to Ron Ludington. Did she coach with Ron Ludington?
Right.
How did that work? Mary also has a twin sister. So when you're listening to interviews with Slavka and certain people, they interchange Mary and Anne, and you're like, wait a second, what was? But people actually talked about what a technician Mary was, and she actually she knew everything that was going on. She talked about Isabeau's jumps and leaning forward and why she's worried about when she grows, about what that could do to the back. But she was just really on point about it. And I think sometimes when we talk about certain things, I think in a subjective sport, like it becomes very controversial to give an opinion, even if it's, so if you're going to talk about Isabeau's jumps, you say that to a current coach and they'll like look sideways. You say that to an old school coach and they're like, oh yeah, right? And
yeah, right.
Yeah. But also, if you follow Isabeau's coach on Instagram, every girl in the rink jumps like that. So this is entirely not an Isabeau thing. This is
a systematic issue. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting because there was so much talk about the coach, because, you know, we had never seen Isabeau on TV before with cameras, right? In that respect. So we really didn't know her coach that much or seen her, but a lot of people would have comments about Isabeau's coach. And I thought it was interesting in the recent interview with her, she said that the coach was choreographing both programs.
Both programs. And I just, why deny an artist like she is, the position she can hit, like you're just selling yourself short.
Well, it's, to me, that's not about whether or not the coach is a good choreographer. I thought that that's a control thing. And when someone is that controlling, they're typically that insecure, right? So, because what happened, you know, what is every coach that has a top athlete afraid of when they go to a choreographer? Is the choreographer going to recommend another coach? Right? That's the thing. If they develop a really close relationship with another choreographer. Remember when people were going to Lori and then all the Lori skaters started going to Lee Barkel? Like there's that sort of a fear, I think, for skaters. And especially if you're a coach that is coming up, that's always the fear. But you even see it at the lower levels. Like in Hackensack, there were certain coaches that coached and choreographed and did this and that. And you even see it on their Instagrams and different things where you're like, okay, they are very afraid of branching out because there is so much competition and people can leave and they do put a lot of work in. And, you know, there is no insurance for coaches that if you have a top kid today, they're going to be yours tomorrow.
It's interesting, even in your own skating, you seek information from a wide variety of people. Like, and even with singing, there are some voice teachers that have wanted complete control, the complete grip. There's a fear if like someone else says one thing to you, it will all unravel and they will mess it all up. And as someone, as the student or athlete, whatever it is, wouldn't you want multiple perspectives? Even if they just say something in a different way that gets you to do the thing the other coach was trying to get you to do.
No, it does help. Sometimes so I've been working my front to back scratch for a while, and it started being pitiful years ago, right? And gotten better. And as the front, this is so frustrating, but sometimes as the front gets better, you then have to maintain the speed and the momentum that you're generating to pivot for the back. And I lost my pivot for several weeks, and had to kind of readjust and relearn it. And I watched those Gus Lucy videos and sent it to Alexei, and he actually watched it. And then we tried the drill and adjusted it because of it. Just certain things, as you learn and to try. And I think that the best coaches do kind of adopt the information for other people and try to see if it works well, rather than.
Well, I'm a big proponent of let's try it and see.
Yeah.
Maybe it will unlock something. Maybe it's a total throwaway exercise. Only one way to find out. Yeah.
So, and now, because that worked so well, I'm redoing my sit the way they do in the Lucy videos. And then I don't know, I've always loved the old school sits, and I had a sit that wasn't the classic Dorothy Hamill way. And it was, so trying to relearn that and all of that stuff. So it is, what you get information for other people, it's only going to make you.
One would think. I mean, this idea that too many chefs in the kitchen will confuse you, I understand it in concept. But, there was even a discussion, I can't remember, maybe it was something with Frank Carroll, where it was if you're having a spin issue, do they send you to that spin doctor? Oh, if you're having an issue with this, and I remember this is what happened with Jason and Corey. Because he knew he needed a little bit more information from something, would go somewhere, but there was such a fear that he was going to leave, which of course eventually he did because he needed to. Maybe I think
also leaving is not a bad thing. I just think in terms of writing, to put it this way, if you had the same writing teacher for every day of your life, every year of your life in school, would you get better? Right. No, right? You would eventually need outside point of view. So I think it's interesting because, I was looking at results this week because I knew that, I've worked with Igor Lukanin for years, and I work with Alexei, who was a single skater and then competed in dance, and they competed against each other, but I had never really looked into how close they were in competitions, because Alexei joked that he was always used to hearing Igor's music when they would compete, because they would always be right after each other for years. And this is what shows you why ice dance judging is not legitimate. It would be
especially
then, if you look, 2002 Europeans, 2002 World, 2003 World, one would be 12th, one would be 13th. And even in each compulsory dance, original dance, free dance, they'd be one spot away from each other. So then I went and actually watched their performances to see who was actually better. And it's interesting to watch because you talk about different people having different styles. I feel like Igor's crossover technique is really smooth and great. But I always noticed Igor's strength in terms of teaching is telling you where to look, which arm to put in front. What do you do? But he doesn't talk about the rise and fall of the knee as much. And Alexei is all rise and fall of the knee. And you're when you marry the two together, you really get it, right? Yeah. So they each have their strength that you put in. And obviously they all work together, right? And Kristen and Igor work together and they have different strengths. So it's okay, yeah. And how that works is super interesting. So yeah, the answer is yes, you should seek out multiple opinions. It's going to make her better. I just got a lot of stress when I was reading Isabeau's interview. I thought, how is she going to do this season? It seems.
Yeah, and I was surprised by the comment where she was oh, this year I was just having fun, and next year I need to be more goal oriented. And I was whoa, that is not how.
That's not the vibe that I got from this season. This season is not at all stressful, especially because we can watch the practice sessions on Peacock, though they don't archive them. It seemed like this year was very stressful. And so I don't know. It is what it is. But also, Yuzuru Hanyu show is going to be on Disney Plus. I think July 14th. I read mid-July, and I think that this is a genius move for both sides, because I was reading this article about cable and how we now all buy all these subscription services, and isn't it kind of the same thing, and all of that, right? But Disney Plus, and I don't know why there's Disney Plus and Hulu, because they have the same owners. At what point are they going to switch that? Who knows if that will happen? But they were talking about how Disney Plus like needs more subscribers, and I thought, well, here you have someone with an ardent fan base. You know, this is someone that can really.
And it was interesting because they said it had been released on Japan's Disney platform. Yeah, but they're bringing it to the Universal Disney platform. Think
about it, and I think that no skating isn't big in the U.S., but here's someone that is popular around the world, right? And I was thinking, if this does well, maybe Disney Plus is a perfect outlet for global skating in the future, because you think maybe it's not going to do well in any one market, but Disney definitely has deep pockets. Yuzu is a global star, and maybe that's where they could really try to invite other skaters to compete against him in a format that works, right? With rules that are more inviting than necessarily IJS rules. Obviously, his fans are very frustrated by the ISU's judging of things, and maybe it's a great opportunity to get skaters like Javier Fernandez or Nathan Chen or someone to do this, because I was, reading that ISU report that seemed pretty dismal, and it was talking about how without Yuzuru Hanyu and without the Russians, there are totally, a lack of people interested. And I thought, keep your eye on this. This is something where, he's definitely someone that has a lot of power right now. He could, he's jumping really well. You see videos of him doing quad loop, Ari Zakarian.
Quads in all of the exhibition. I mean, it's amazing. Yeah.
When someone has that much talent and that much ability, and they still seem to have energy, and now they have Disney Plus in their back pocket, I think, listen, they could totally create new venues and avenues for
and the interesting thing about Disney Plus, like, yes, I know they have like the Marvel movies on there and like National Geographic stuff on there, but the bulk of people I know that have it are families, because there's so much family programming on it, that all the children's movies, all the children's shows, all that sort of stuff. And even as I think about my nieces and nephews, Disney Plus is their go-to, and if figure skating popped up, I think they would watch it.
Especially if you can get to know the personality, because this is such a personality-driven sport. Right. And that's the biggest thing I think that people forget when the Russians were banned and the retirements happened. Those were all of the personalities that we were talking about all the time. Right. The Russians had the personality, whether or not you liked their skating. Trusova, Shevakova, Kosternaya, Tutberidze, Valieva, Yuzuru Hanyu, Nathan Chen, Hubble and Donahue, Papadakis and Cizeron. These were the personalities we were covering, and then they were all gone at once. Yeah. And the sport is recalibrating, and I think it will take several years for that.
And we seem to see it's such like a reactive sort of coaching philosophy, it seems, where people then just try to emulate the personalities that were winning. And it was like, no, they were winning because they found their personality.
But don't you think that's true in any discipline? I just remember I lived in a dorm where there were a bunch of theater students my sophomore year, and the way that the sound carried outside. Wicked was popular, and to hear people singing Defying Gravity and like hours a day, you would just hear them all.
But when you would think about that, most people then end up trying to do an Idina Menzel impersonation instead of do their version of it, which would be far more interesting to hear at all times. Like, I don't want to see a stand-in that gives me the feeling of someone else. I want to see something that's uniquely yours. Why your version of Defying Gravity? Yeah. We already have the other one. Yeah. Yes. And I find that in the skating all the time. The minute someone has great success with a type of program, you always see these mid-level skaters now all come up with like a sideways step of the same kind of music or the same kind of approach, because now they think that's the formula. But to me, in all of this sort of performance art, the common denominator is finding a formula that works for you, and then that's whatever that is good enough.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I do think it's hard. I think judge sports inherently make everyone even more insecure because, right? And we're asking people to be individual, but then we're also judging them and maybe not as receptive to different ideas as far, right? Yeah. It's kind of
and taste is taste. You know, I used to, when I talk to certain students, especially when, let's say they've done a competition and they don't do well, and it is subjective, and I always refer to it like being attracted to someone. If you go to a party and you want to date someone at that party and they're not into you, and you decide, okay, I'm going to go home and I'm going to change my clothes, I'm going to change my cologne, I'm going to change my hair, I'm going to come back with a little bit different personality, then you come back, they still aren't into it.
No.
Because they're just not into it. And some people just inherently will not respond to someone's voice. Someone inherently will not respond to someone's skating, even though I cannot tell you how many times at a skating event, I don't know how the person sitting next to me and I are watching the same program. I'll be like on my feet, just being like transcended by someone's program. And then the person next to me could be like, eh. And I'm like, I don't know how this is possible. Or when we see things that everyone says like, oh, this is the most beautiful, amazing Anna Karenina of all time. And I'm like, I don't really get that at all. It's tough. And I don't know that in that situation, someone could change it to suddenly make me like something I just inherently don't.
Yeah. I agree. It's yeah, I agree. I was actually talking to Ari Zakarian about skating in Japan, a couple of weeks ago, and I was asking, what are the crowds like there? Because after the ISU report came out, Hanyu shows,
Japan is always the major source.
Yeah, and Yuzuru Hanyu shows are sold out.
Yeah.
But we saw at Worlds this year at AHK and Nationals, the crowd wasn't always sold out for the first time. And why is that? Because before Yuzuru, Mao Asada really carried that market. And I think sometimes his fans forget that there was a market before him that was very successful.
That built ultimately to lead to his huge success.
Yeah.
Also,
he had unprecedented success and not taking that away. This was a market that was building from 2006 with Shizuka Arakawa. Daisuke Takahashi and Mao really led in getting into this, but there hasn't been that same personality, and why. And certain things, Ari Zakarian in his article with Ilia Malinin, he really believes the jump. So he really believes that Mao Asada, the triple axel. I think that there were a couple factors with Mao Asada that made her super successful beyond just the triple axel. I think the triple axel when she came was huge, and the fact that she was beating Arina Slitskaya. She also had a unique charisma.
Yes.
Right?
Beautiful skater. Come on. She wasn't a just jumps person.
But he just meant they want to see something new, because I said, why isn't Kaori having as many endorsements? She was always sort of featured and she does well, but he's like, well, she skates beautifully and everyone knows that, but she's not doing something first. And I thought that's interesting, but also, how much did Mao's rivalry with Yuna also
huge? That's
intangible, and that's not to take away from Mao, but she was also against someone who was the same age, approximately months apart, right? With a similar level of talent from a country that has been a rival.
Yeah.
You can't
script it better. Yeah.
So I was kind of wondering this last season, I kind of think that the injury to Yuma Kageyama was way more impactful than we think about it, because Shoma is not the same level of personality as Yuzuru Hanyu. He doesn't have the same magnetism, though he's a gorgeous skater.
Yeah.
But if he were going neck and neck, we knew that Shoma was going to win nationals unless he gave it away. But if he had Yuma to be neck and neck with him, how much more interesting would the final nationals worlds have been, right? Yeah. And I think that Yuma has been steadily climbing to where, no, he doesn't have the singular personality, but he's extremely charming and he's growing artistically. And maybe that natural competitiveness would have been more interesting. I mean, Mao had Miki Ando to compete against domestically, right? So I think that would be that kind of a factor that's been missing a little bit in that market.
I have to say, since you brought it up, and I'm going to tread lightly, you just reminded me that you two speak, but the Ari Zakarian interview was very hard for me to read.
Yes, you could, and you full out. I don't agree with everything Ari says or endorse it.
I really disagreed with a lot of it. First of all, like, it is such a constant narrative of whining with certain why not me? Why am I not more famous? Why didn't I get the title? And this just sort of idea, you know, oh, they don't do this. Oh, poor Ilia, poor Ilia, poor Ilia. I just don't buy the narrative. And the idea he didn't get enough press coming from the agent is a unique take, because isn't part of the job is to make sure that that press is there?
Yes. I mean, I agreed and disagreed, right? Because there are certain factors here. US figure skating and IMG have relationships, right? And Ari is from outside of the system. Almost every skater is represented by IMG, right? Nathan Chen was with Yuki Sakusa. She has been an agent of US figure skaters. You know, it's the establishment, right? For a long time. And yes, I think that if you're a Yuki Sakusa client, we have seen that they get the Coca-Cola endorsement, or Carly Patterson was on the McDonald's bags doing a split leap that wasn't 180 degrees. And I never knew why they picked that picture. And it always her like doing an incomplete split on every McDonald's bag. Right, but they, you know, she had Evan Lysacek, he was a Coca-Cola. So those kind of name brand things, they get to a certain level. She was very good at placing people on Dancing with the Stars. She's behind all those kids' books. Do they all have the same co-author? You know, yes, Nathan Chen wrote a kids' book. And then you see Meryl Davis has a kids' book, and the Shibutanis have a kids' book. And you're like, okay, again, there's a playbook here, right?
Formula, a total formula.
Formula. But I did think, and this is where US figure skating is really fallen off of a cliff. And I think that Ari had a point that, okay, Ilia Malinin landed the first quad axel. How come US figure skating didn't have that as like a paid promotion on Instagram? Like they didn't set it up to go viral. That was a huge moment for a federation that you only get so many glaring opportunities like that, right? Like
when was also clumsy about it though. Like Hanyu's first triple axel at nationals.
Yes.
Like some of these moments. So the fact that it was in like this half empty arena, like
doesn't help
that it wasn't like in the spotlight.
Yes.
And that was a little bit, if somehow, which of course he had to do it, he obviously did it at the right time for him. And they all of that right from the skating standpoint.
There's a synergy that has to take place. The empty crowd is a huge problem to begin with in any of these factors, but when that did happen, why wasn't it like promoted? And then the fact that nationals had no audience in San Jose, but again, they should be giving out free tickets and they're so worried about sales, right? But how do you have sales in the future? If you have a packed crowd, they automatically start reacting and feeding off of each other. Then when someone does
the event gets a surge of energy, and even if you're watching at home, you think like, wow, that looks fun.
That was fun. I want to take part in that.
Yeah.
I want to see that, right? It's just that intangible energy, right? Oh my God, it looks cool. To whereas when you see something with an empty audience, it's like, is this?
But it inevitably is a lukewarm in response because it's at half capacity.
Yes.
Yeah, so the whole thing just seems a little underwhelming. The other thing that's tricky is, you know, he wished that the World Championship quad axel had gotten more momentum. But of course, that's tricky because
if you're the agent,
landed it several times and he did not win. And then we have to open the conversation of why did this quad axel not win? And here's the thing, if you put up an Instagram short, like how you do those shorts or whatever, and that was the clip, I think people would be very excited about it.
And you can pay to promote it, right? So it can share organically and paid. And as someone who's behind
but
that,
I'm thinking I think if you push like the clip of the whole program,
No,
the
it's
general public is not interested. And even
the other thing about Ilia, and I was saying, the one thing that, because they're following a formula, you're talking about formula. I mean, guess who's doing Ilia Malinin's program this year?
Lynn
Bourne, and he works with Raphael. I mean, it's right out of the playbook.
Right.
I don't think it helps that Ilia is Russian and the war is going on right now, and that's just a timing thing, and that's the way the world is. Chris Yamaguchi won gold where the economy was in a recession, and Japan was dominating the car market, and there was all sorts of things going on at that point in time, and it was hard for her to build it first. I think right now, Ilia needs to work on his presentation, which they need to keep putting him in shows.
But that's the problem with the article also, is he's like, you don't see Usain Bolt smiling. Why do skaters have to smile and emote during their program? And I was like, because there's a whole mark for it.
Well, he also was coached by Nation. Okay, I mean, come on. No,
Bolt doesn't have a PCS score he's working towards. Yeah,
I think he's correct that the quad axel should be worth more points. I agree with that. But the performance does matter, and Nathan Chen had charisma. He carried that Elton John program. It worked for him. And that's where Shea can help Ilia, although they totally are trying to follow this. I felt like last year's free skate tried to emulate Nathan, and we don't know.
Instead of finding Ilia's thing that he can do.
But Nathan had danced classes for years, and he definitely took ballet. We don't know if he was taking off ice. I don't feel like Ilia is taking off ice dance classes, and that's where he's missing out. I also think that he does have a personality. I think he needs to give a lot more interviews and get comfortable speaking, right? And I think he clearly has opinions, right? But I think he needs to learn where that line is, and he will learn that, right? I think that kind of is the way it is, but you can't force it. I think they have something where he lacks. I think he does have personality. Obviously, he's got a lot of guts to go for a quad axel. So inside, he has what it takes to become.
He needs to find his version of it. You are absolutely right. When Nathan would do sort of those like big modern dance breaks at the end, even regardless of what you thought about the choreography or the movement, there was such like heart and commitment to it. And the Ilia one just looks like someone flailing because they know they're supposed to do this now. It didn't see, there's a wall between me and that performance. And it just doesn't let me in because it seems inauthentic.
Yeah, and I think he will get there, but I think that they need to really manage. The other thing I thought of, on one hand, the fact that he was doing the quad axel so quickly is great, right? But you could tell that other aspects of his skating have been neglected, right? In the presentation and the off ice and the dance and the carriage, right? It's almost like a get rich quick thing where you're like, okay, now you have to work on all of the aspects. I mean, I think it's fantastic that, your first full season internationally as a senior, you wanted to go for Worlds. Obviously, he was at Worlds the year before, but he started on that season in the Junior Grand Prix. Okay, this was your first like big time season and you expected to win the first time. That doesn't happen for many people, right? So, okay, now you have to go and work on the different aspects. And it's probably better for him in the long run if he does work on all of those areas. He was also injured for part of the time, and some of his quads weren't fully rotated, and he had a rough national championship, which, okay, we talk about, people will debate forever whether or not Michelle Kwan or Chen Lu deserved the gold medal in 1996, the same way you could debate if Tessa Virtue and Scott Moyer or Merrill Davis and Charlie White deserved the gold in 2014. But I will say in both cases, the reasons, one of the big is momentum and consistency. And I don't think it helped Ilia Malinin going into the World Championships in an internet age when we can all watch the national championships from everywhere, that he bombed at nationals. Because when he goes to Worlds, I'm already thinking of you as being not at the same level, right? I can't help it. I just watched you defecate on the ice, it was a horrible performance, that he would be the first.
Because again, if you put all your eggs in one basket and it doesn't work out, it gives no reason to keep you up in the mix. Yeah.
every performance matters in this kind of sport, especially when you're building up at the top. That's why it's performance based, right? And not all of Shoma's landings were the best. He almost lost to Junhwa Cha. Junhwa Cha came on very strong at the second half of the season. Had Jun been stronger on the first half, he might have been the world champion. And you start to wonder, how much did the fact that Jun hasn't been at the top as long as Shoma played in here? You know, Shoma was the reigning world champion. He has a long history. He was at home. Jun was the challenger, but he came on strong almost at the last minute.
Right.
So, and can he sustain that?
I hope so. I am rooting for him.
Oh my God, they need to give him the Gus Lucy video on the axle.
On the lack of delay before the
Yes. It's like, Jesus Christ, Paul, what are you doing? Like,
stalling. It just reads as
go watch Paul at the Olympics. He stalls before the axle again, and you're like, and steps out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
almost deciding ahead of time. Yeah.
It's the same thing. I think if Jun can fix that stall, he could win this season.
Yeah.
He has more of the balance than Ilia does. And then you have to wonder, how much does Shoma have in the tank? We don't know. He was injured last year too. And
Shoma, who we've been watching on the senior circuit for literally 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he may have more. Maybe that'll be an interesting dynamic to go back and forth. And I think the men's event, there are enough personalities that it's really interesting. I did agree with Ari that I don't think it helps the Russians to automatically say, oh, everything is so much worse without us. In dance and in men's, it's not true. In women's and pairs, it is true. But it is what it is.
I mean, define worse. I don't miss those programs in the women's discipline.
No, but I think that they had an inherent personality that was interesting. I mean, it's like reality TV, right? It's something is happening. It's a car wreck is happening all the time and we're watching it, right?
Yeah.
But one thing that I thought was interesting, you speak of this week, is that we saw that Dr. Shvetsky was in a photo with Moskvina, right? And I feel this is so interesting is because there's all of that, well, it was just Valieva taking it, and obviously not. But the Valieva case hasn't even gone to court yet. And again, Dr. Shvetsky, the one who oversaw Team tutberidze,
among other horrible things that he has been full-blown, like...
The rowers before the Beijing Olympics, Bobrova's Meldonium, 2016 Europeans, right? And this is someone who hasn't been fired. He's actually been given a role in the Russian Federation now. Okay, so, and they're posting pictures with him. I mean, talk about not getting it. But
the lack of awareness, yeah.
Somehow they have done such an expert job of making it, oh my God, this like innocent 15-year-old girl. None of the heat has gone to the doctor. Somehow all of this, right? And you think, if she gets a slap on the wrist after all of this, it's really a slap on the wrist for the Russian Federation. And they clearly have done nothing to actually look at the real reasons behind it. And I have to tell you, yes, eteri is super problematic. She's not the only one who worked with Dr. Shvetsky. Nina Mosier brought him in. Nina Mosier actually was a high person in the Federation. They're tied.
Nothing will ever make sense about the out of nowhere consistency of
Morris?
No, Klimova. No, who the
Sobova and Klimov.
Yes, that's what it was. That out of nowhere, skating to the Addams family. I was like, where has this been? Their whole career, I've never seen them.
Strength and the vivacity. It was incredible. But that gets lost. But I have to say, I think Moskvina is a master. Because if you watch medaling and then you see her in the and then you see her in the photo with Shvetsky, you have one opinion of Tamara Moskvina. But if you speak with her, she's so intelligent, she's so gracious, she is. But I will say, when the season after an Olympics, when everyone is exhausted, when everyone is on fumes and they have no international competitions, and her two teams came out stronger than ever. And then we saw side-by-side triple Lutz, side-by-side triple loop,
throw quads. Yeah.
And then we see the photo of her with Shvetsky. I'm like, okay, that's just my opinion, okay?
Yeah. It was an unusual PR choice.
That's why when people say, oh, I'm so sad that Tuktamisheva isn't allowed to compete, just let her compete, not the other ones. And I'm like, how do you think she's competing at this?
And everyone accused us of being so weird about it that season. And I remember you saying, like, it is physically impossible to be this on at this many competitions with no rest in between. Something is weird here. They're like, you just hate Russia, da, 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 da. And then, of course, she just came out and said, oh, yeah, are you kidding? It was legal. I was on meldonium the whole time. Yeah. And
it was legal that season that she did it. So
fair enough.
Then they will turn and they will say, can trimetazidine make someone skate so beautifully? And you're like, well, no, but it can make them train to skate that beautifully, right?
Right. You can teach them to hold that position after that quad. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It can give them that energy to go to the rink every day and do 13 competitions. Yeah.
And deny their body's request for rest. Yeah.
And speaking of that, Daniel Grosso just arrived in Novogorsk. He got his new program from Benoit Richaud. He was at the Skating Club of Boston for several weeks, and now he is there. Eyes on that consistency and what they can do with more time with him. I would keep an eye, because you know that Novogorsk is where it all goes down. That's where the Russians have the the TMS. It's that magnetic stimulation that they do to the brains, because there's so much, when they talk about, the Russians have an interesting way of speaking about sports that's really fascinating, where they talk about micro traumas to the muscles. It's also to the brain, the amount of stress, like they really study this. And it all goes into what Tom Z is talking about with periodization, but it's spoken about in a different way, right? A lot of the drugs that you read that the Russians are taking, and a lot of the treatments have to deal with PTSD. And so some of that is like the trauma of training, like the mental trauma. And then after a long day of training, if you spend 20 minutes with the electrodes on your brain, are you then more mentally and physically capable of doing it the next way? Because remember, the mind guides the body. So they have the labs, and it's legal, okay? It's not illegal, the TMS, right? But like, what are you doing after training? Some people stretch, some people could take an ice bath. The Russians are doing that, and they're also
brain erased to tolerate the intolerable training conditions.
Well, then if you watch the documentary with Eteri, she seems pretty traumatizing, right? And then, but if you then go on, you have your, electrodes on your brain, and you go to, and it looks like science fiction, except that it's real, and they talk about it. And there are so many clues if you look at the articles of what they're actually studying. I mean, it's really genius, because also the xenon gas also goes into why that works and why that's so effective, and the different methods.
But to me, because we know of this kind of training that could even cause PTSD like this, is to me why we have seen over the years since I've been watching skating, I've always had some Russian I've adored who is outrageously inconsistent and implodes and self-destructs. And you're like, well, if that is the mental game happening in the background, I'm amazed you can even lace up your skates.
Well, that and that they didn't believe.
I loved that Volchkova. But then suddenly when you go back with this in mind about like the turmoil that must be happening behind the scenes, you're like, it's a wonder she can do anything.
But you remember, the Russians didn't believe that you could give your maximum every day in practice and train the long program. So when Viktor Petrenko had his horrible skate at the Olympics in '92, he did the long program maybe once or twice a week. And they just would do sections, right? But over time, tutberidze trains and they do the full program every day, right? And that's very different. But how all of a sudden did the Russians change that?
Right.
And what happened? And at what point did the pharmacological preparation play into that difference in the training method. Because also, do you remember how the Russian ladies, like, this is not to body shame, this is just if you have eyes. The Russian ladies, a lot of them used to be quite tall for skaters, while we would see them with these big jumps. And then all of a sudden they became very smaller with very small jumps over time. That's
at the time they were like, let's get the strongest legs we can find. And then you would get those Volchkovas or whomever that it was
Volchkova, Bucherskaya, Soldotova, Tatiana Malinina, like her lots, okay?
The height, and that seemed to be, and again, at least I still find that technique more exciting, that all from the legs. So they were finding people with these outrageously powerful legs, and now they're going for aerodynamic shapes instead.
So it's just, but when Moskvina took the photo with Shvetsky,
not a great
one. Hasn't even gone to trial yet. Like,
oh, you can.
I mean, I think in many ways, everyone is really lucky that there aren't more figure skating reporters. And you could tell that US figure skating is really banking on that, because they haven't responded to Christine Brennan asking them.
I was going to ask you about all that, because there was some traction on it for a little bit, because she even did the follow-up article where someone in Congress or something was like, wait, hold on, what's happening now?
Yes, but how was someone that was so,
victim shaming
and against
non-believer of survivors,
right? How is that kind of person? And you think, well, there aren't that many figure skating reporters out there, and not many who aren't connected to the federation in some way.
Right.
So they're really banking on the fact that not many people are going to cover this. And they're very lucky, because there are a couple of things that the gymnastics had going. Obviously, the fact, and this is horrible, but the fact that Dr. Nasser had access to so many Olympic champions who then became really known figures. You're not dealing with known figures, and celebrity matters in terms of getting traction, because when one of his clients would tweet about Nasser, they had how many millions of followers, right? So it creates this ecosystem where it creates, in figure skating, some of these victims, it's a much smaller market, and they're not all public, right? And not everyone is speaking out about it. So interesting, and they're almost betting on that. So they're almost betting on the sport not being super popular, or being like, we can do what we want.
So they've never made a statement at all still?
No, but actually
she started, or she's about
to. That when Christine put out the last article, like, they've never said anything about Kelsey Parker or about the fact that someone got developmental coach who had a safe sport violation against them. US Figure Skating actually sent out an email a couple minutes, like maybe half hour after Christine had tweeted. And it was from Tracy Merrick, the new CEO. And it was all, and the first lines were athletes first. And I thought, oh, the irony. And then of course, Christine.
Deafness of it all,
So.
Did she have anything to do with Kelsey's position?
Tracy, no, I don't think so.
Okay.
I had heard other people were up for that for a while. I mean, I don't think it has like the best salary in the world, and you have to move to Colorado, and not everyone wants to do that. And I don't think there are a lot of people, but just interesting how they all. And it makes you wonder how powerful are some of those families in US figure skating? So, and I think it's interesting that, there are certain things like Alexa and Chris have a new pair academy, right? And you think all this stuff would save sport. Well, they announced a pair. One of the first pairs they announced, the girl is 12, the guy is 20. And you think, like, what could possibly go wrong there, right? To normalize those age differences. Not saying that something will necessarily happen, but saying that something could happen, right? And you think, how is that allowed? They can't even compete together necessarily at certain levels. What is going on here?
Right.
Like, so.
Doing that in Chicago?
Yeah.
So did she formally announce her retirement?
I mean, they never said they're retiring, but she's coaching full-time in Chicago with the pair thing. And she had certainly indicated that they were going to be done. And remember, they were very emotional at nationals, at the World Tour.
But no official statement has been given.
No, and of course, that's also US figure skating. I mean, we live in a world where no one retires, but at the same time, she's listed as a full-time coach at their skating academy. So,
right.
And yeah, so just
the cycle continues.
I'm not saying it's a cycle. It's just when I saw that in the midst of the Kelsey Parker, when I saw a 12-year-old and a 20-year-old, I thought there is just not a lot of self-awareness going on in figure skating.
Yeah, you got to zoom out, folks. Like, yeah.
Well, you were students of Delilah, who's been under investigation for how long? Like, what have we learned from this time?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That was a little bit of a cringe. You think that, yeah. And also, but again, not the first team. Remember Shelby Lyons and Brian Wells, huge age difference.
That was a creepy watch always. Fish called Wanda. Yeah. Silver outfits.
Oh man. But I have to tell you, I am getting excited because they're starting to have the summer competitions.
Isn't it crazy already? Like, of course already, but yeah, you're like, gosh, it's such an early start.
Well, this weekend it's like the Garden State Games, and then next weekend the ice dancers go to Chesapeake, which is one of the big early competitions, both for solo dance and for like the Junior Grand Prix and everything like that. And you know, the single skaters that are up for the Junior Grand Prix this year are starting to compete. So Kirk Haggetto and Sasha Fegan, who are at Junior Nationals, are competing, and some of the different things. So you think of who's going for those Junior Grand Prix will be determined really soon, and this season.
Not to take us away, but can you explain to me, I just should have Googled it, this Star Andrews post from her hospital bed?
Okay, so I'm not a doctor.
Neither am I, and I apparently didn't even know how to Google those terms at the time, and I was just like, whoa.
Is tachycardia, right? Is that the term? I mean,
I didn't even know how to pronounce it, yeah.
She's had heart problems in the past, and, you know, wish her well, and this is, you know, really concerning. Yeah. So, you know, and it's continued to be something that she's had to deal with, and it's really unfortunate, and, you know, wish her the best. And yeah, I mean, your heart is everything as an athlete. So that's,
yeah.
You know, and amazing how well she did last season at Nationals, you know, dealing with that, because she's had heart problems before. Remember the COVID year, or one of the COVID years, as we've had. Remember, she did really well on the Grand Prix, and then had a problem after, you know, and all of that. So
gotta be tough. Yeah.
So, you know, and I think her mom has had heart problems as well. So, you know, you just really hope that, you know, there's someone out there that hears of her story and can help, and that they can really figure out what is going on for her.
Yeah.
Tough. So, yeah. And in other news, Putin is going to have the friendship games. Basically, like it's 1984, they're planning their own Olympics, essentially, in Russia, in case they are not participating in 2024. And the IOC is continuing to dance. We're like, well, we'll let you in, but with refugee status, right? As long as you're not pro-war. And the Russians are saying, we don't want to do that. But then they're saying they're going to let us back. And you see all of the dancing. They're making plans for everything.
I mean, at this point, like, don't you already have to be sort of getting ready to qualify? You
know, it's getting to the point where in gymnastics, they would have to go for individual qualifiers rather than team. And they'll listen, every week that the Russians are not back, their chances of being at the Olympics go down. But I think there's a big feeling in figure skating that, you know, obviously the ISU decided to postpone discussing how to let them back in, and they, you know, maintained the ban. There's a feeling that it won't happen until the team medals are settled. And that's where I think, you know, because the Russians really delayed that. They could have given the evidence for Valieva, and that could have been determined a long way away. This is where their own kind of maneuvering is playing, you know, against them, because had that been settled, it would be easier, even, you know, because if that were settled, right, you could then have a discussion about, well, does a 15-year-old figure skater really have anything to do with the war? And there would be arguments for and against that. But when you have that, plus the doping, and you have all of these athletes who haven't gotten a team medal, I think it's impossible to have that discussion. What changes between now and October? I think Valieva's case, will there be a hearing, or will there be a verdict by then? And then I think to kind of go from there. I think how that verdict plays out may also impact whether or not the rest of them come back in.
And also taking the lead from other sports. I mean, it seems like everyone's sort of looking peripherally to see what other sort of sports federations are doing about this sort of thing.
I think figure skating would push itself off of a cliff if they were to let Russia back with the war going on and
unresolved Olympic.
And unresolved, yeah. I think you just can't, but that's the thing. And I thought it was so interesting is that the same week that ISU was about to meet is when, that dam got blown up in Ukraine, and you're like, Putin is just not helping their case at any point in time.
I thought the interview you did with, what's her name, Maya, excuse me. I found that very interesting. And she was refreshingly level-headed in her conversation about it. Because again, we read these interviews that sound so hysterical from everyone.
She's been a great reporter. She interviewed me last summer. They did a really big article about me in Sports Rue, where they took the picture of me and eteri and turned it into colors and everything. But she had interviewed Megan Duhamel, and that's how when she emailed me, she was like, I'm Russian, but I don't live in Russia. That way I can have more freedom of the press. And, I've been getting to know her, and she's super intelligent and goes to so many competitions. And then remember when Isabeau and her coach discussed puberty, and that, what'd she say about the butter on the toast or avoiding? She gave that quote, which if that got picked up in the US press, that would have been way more shocking. But again, USFS was lucky that not many people jumped on that.
Right.
And that's kind of forgotten, right? But that quote, may come resurface one day. But remember, she gave that to the Russian press. And that's why I always say, there aren't a lot of reporters that are reading the Russian news. And I think it's actually really important to follow what's happening in Russia and what's happening in Japan, and especially with Russia being banned, but they're not acting like they're banned. They are going full steam ahead.
It was interesting. I think, was it the Tarasova interview when she's like, as if we're going to go and say we're refugees, like for the Olympics. But I think she might have been the one that wasn't so keen on the idea of the Friendship Games.
She's not, yeah.
She's like, I get having the parallel competitions. And again, from a federation competitive standpoint only, they did do a good job at keeping people competing the best they could while they were ineligible for international competition. But she was like, for the Olympics, like, how sad, like, don't even try.
When you look back at last year, remember how, like in China, in gymnastics, they have 2 nationals every year. And I think one were called like winter nationals and the other in the summer. When they had the nationals in Russia in December, right, over Christmas here, and then they have, the same time as Worlds, before Worlds, it was in early March. What was the difference between those 2 competitions? Yes, you had to qualify for one and there was a smaller field, but they essentially were the same competition.
Yeah.
And you saw the same matchup again.
I think it's just competition drills. Yeah, almost. You know what I mean? Like, even when they do the simulated competitions in the training rinks, like, okay, this Friday, everybody's doing their short program and competition scenario. I just think it was trying to emulate that. And again, I don't know what else they could have done. Mm-hmm. And so it does make sense to me, but it was interesting for Tarasova to be like, this is silly. It's the Olympics or it's not. Like, don't even try.
Yeah. I do, but if you talk to Ari Zakarian, it's so interesting. He's like, if Ilia Petrosian wanted to represent Armenia, she could be the biggest star. That is a place that hasn't had quite.
Would they? That's the real question.
Have you ever, I was wondering about that, but you think like, I don't know, one of my neighbors is Armenian, and I went to school with someone else who was Armenian, and they're very, especially in the US, like there's Armenian churches and they have Armenian festivals and societies, and it's like a very tight-knit group, and everyone knows everyone, and you're like, wow, like maybe someone could, if they represented Armenia and they had a skater, that would be an untapped market. That would be fascinating.
They would get behind it, but it was interesting in that article where he was talking about like the country just doesn't value it at all at the higher levels. And that even when someone went to talk about representing Armenia, because they were Armenian. They were like, well, if you do a real sport, let us know.
Yeah.
And you know, if you have that mindset, you're never going to attract anyone.
Yes. Yeah. But I think that was also because he's male, and right, and there's
that whole thing. Yeah.
Also, Peng and Jin split and have new partners, and I think, what is happening in Chinese skating?
Was there an exhibition we forgot to watch where they announced it?
Whatever happened to that video? That was one of the strangest things we have ever seen, where we said goodbye to new pairs and hello to. That was one of the truly iconic. Okay,
Yeah.
truly.
Yeah, I think people should break up that way, or you get fired that way. Yeah. That was
things I could say.
But I was just impressed to hear they're still going, because again, it's shrouded in such secrecy what's happening over there, and you sometimes see people and you don't, and then they do compete or they don't. Like,
well, like Sway and Han, they released a song together.
They merge every so often and just give us some beauty and then disappear again. Yeah.
When they told me that she still wants to skate, listen,
they would be perfect for these sorts of like pro shows and pro competitions and stuff too, if they didn't want to maintain the same technical level in the jumps or something like that.
Yeah, they would also be perfect to come back right now. I mean,
yeah.
There's clearly an opening in
the
pairs field. So I think that's one discipline, but there's a million new partners. Gabby Izzo is now skating with Eteri, who was from Canada, so I don't know which country they will represent. In ice dance, we did see that Olivia Smart and Tim Deek will be eligible to skate on the Grand Prix this year. So I think that's important.
For Spain.
For Spain, she's definitely. Love that, though. This is so figure skating, right? She's British, he's Germany, represents Spain.
Well, I mean, Aliona and Bruno, in a way.
It just makes you think, like, yes, I know the Olympics are all about all the different colors, but it feels like such a side door. And then you're like, well, then why not just let the top so many athletes compete? And I mean, it tends to work itself out, but then there are always those cases, you know, it's not a fair world. Nothing is, right? It's
because I really thought they were looking to compete for Germany.
They never told us, you know.
I see. That was probably just fan speculation or something. Okay.
There was just like a lot of speculation about that. Yeah. But
okay.
We'll see. Yeah. But again, Aliona and Robin are skating together. Remember, she was Ukrainian.
Representing Germany.
Yeah. Germany with a French partner.
French yeah. In some ways, I don't mind that, because why would your right partner maybe from wherever? And just, I want to see you as a team, regardless of the country. It's when it seems like, which I don't think Olivia is doing. I'm not saying that at all. But like in the moments where we've seen people trying to sidestep competition by coming in through another country, that's a different story to me.
Well, I always, you know, I skate with this junior team, Emily and William, and I always joke with them like, yeah, I followed skating when Kristen was American.
That's how old I am. Yeah. Okay.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
One of like, this novice team is skating to Chicago, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I saw this in theaters and you weren't born yet. And I thought, oh.
Right. A further testament that maybe it's not the right material. Just throwing that out there.
No, it is the right material for them. Oh my God.
Okay.
They have Boy Drake, who's novice, but he also does solo dance. But when he does solo dance, he does this rock number, and it's sort of like if Elvis Stoico did ice dance. But he has complete showmanship of like a Philippe Candeloro, but more serious and rocker. It's a sight. There's some star quality there.
All of the 94 men's podium just combined in one guy. Okay.
I was watching this. I was like riveted. This is fascinating. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's okay. We had, you know, when the Olivia Smart, you know, the kids were, you know, everyone takes their skates up at the same time, and I was like, so what countries are you all considering of representing? You know, like what?
Go to the dartboard and see what you get. Yeah.
Well, it's so normalized now. It's becoming more and more normalized. So like, great. You know, where's everyone's grandparents from? And let's work this out. Okay, so you have this country, this one, and this. Good.
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating.
These kids are on top of it. You listen. They might not, pass algebra, but they know how they can get to the Olympics in another country. All right.
Well, for X is the country you're going to be representing.
Now Asada, by the way, posted that she is going to try to do the triple axel this year at 32. You know what?
It's going to be that stretch between 2014 and 2018 again, where it's like a nail biter while she finds it again.
Midori Ito has said that she wants to do the double axel again. Mal wants to do the triple. Michael Solanowski is practicing his triple axel before he turns 40. Okay. You know what? Good for adult skating, and I'm here for it. All right. I want to see Mal do it. You know what?
Yeah.
Put that on Disney Plus. All right.
I would watch it.
Also, something really horrific happened in Russia this week, because the narrative about Zagitova is that she's not the brightest crayon in the big box of colors, right?
Okay.
So they invited her to be a speaker at an economics forum.
Perfect choice.
And I thought, what does she know about economics? And then they asked her something. They were trying to ask her about having men and women compete together. And she said something about gender and didn't understand the question. And the deputy of sports didn't understand. It was like a big faux pas. And it was front page news. Yeah.
Well, what was the question? Like, she thought it was like same-sex partners, or she thought it was about like trans athletes or something?
They were asking her about, it was a stupid question. It was about the exhibition competition and having
and technically they're lumped together.
Yes.
I see.
And
she took it a whole other
yes. And
backpedal. Yeah. Okay. Of all places. Yeah.
Of all countries. It was, they're very supportive of patinage and Hubble skating together there.
For sure. Love it. Julien is their choreographer, I think. Yeah.
Well, you're not supposed to be coached by someone who makes statements of those. If you read the IOC things, every time Julien opens his mouth, you think, well, they are not going to be allowed. And Diana Davis and Gleb Smolkin were supposed to skate in this show in Ion, but they hadn't gotten like the waiver from the ISU. Because with the old rules about amateurs and professionals being in shows together and having to get certain waivers. And I heard someone made a phone call or text to someone at US Figure Skating and was like, the top US skaters can't be in a show with someone, especially if they're from a banned country. And they were on the list as being from Russian. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I do about how they actually got pulled, but they were announced on the, advertisement for the show. I know that someone from the Washington Post went to watch them, and they were definitely not in the show suddenly. And you wonder, eteri was at Danny G's wedding, but would she have been there to watch their program? If
not some fascinating photos from that wedding.
Why did it look like it was in an empty warehouse?
Something was very weird about it. Wardrobe included. Yeah.
There were so many riveting things about that wedding. I think we can be at his next. I think his next wedding will be great, whoever that person is, right? I mean, maybe the next one won't be at a warehouse. It's okay. But Zagitova went after that bouquet.
No, I was going to say. Sorry, but I totally pulled you out of the other conversation.
And then I was watching Sherbakova and them dancing, and I was like, oh, her feet. It's not just her crossovers. When she dances, they look like her ankles.
Turns out it's a problem on the ground as well.
Was anyone else watching that? I mean, and his wife sort of looks vaguely like Zagitova.
Looks like could be one of the skaters. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. And then I was thinking, notice how the skaters that he choreographed were for there, but Zhenya Medvedeva was not there. Remember, she didn't use it.
Interesting who was included in that guest list and who was not. Yeah.
But at least Maurice was there. He is really the glue of this group.
And becoming a coach.
And you know what? I really hope he's teaching basic jump technique.
Single toes and single sows. Just start him right out the gate. Yeah.
How did they put him in every gala for years? I mean, he basically just painted himself a different color and they're like, this is great. Yeah.
At the Olympics, that's when it was the most egregious to me.
Listen, I can think of no better place for him to coach. The beginner level skaters at Team Tutberidze, I mean, it's perfection. Okay.
Because that's what it sounded like he was doing. He was going to stay and coach with Eteri's group, even though not in the official part, but in the other section, as opposed to, for instance, going back to Georgia.
Going back, I mean, he's from Moscow, so yeah, I mean, okay. Again, I love the side door of international competitions. Yes, this is.
Speaking of side doors, that's Jonathan's mom, not my mom.
Oh, Jonathan, yes, she's going to represent, she's going to be the Australian, but you know, she's iconic. Do you know why she is iconic? What is she? Because remember,
Hubble and Donahue, the moving
people don't realize that at 4 continents, you can have a Russian caller. And she was the one when they were neck and neck with Sinitsa and Katsalapov going into Worlds medal. They left a door open and she gave them that base level rotational lift. They were sitting there, that kiss and cry.
I have never seen a group of people so utterly shocked in my life. Across them, the coach, like everyone.
Chalk and Bates won and they were like, oh, we weren't supposed, yeah.
Chalk and Bates felt guilty almost, it looked like. You're like, oh, not really how we wanted to win. But yeah, so I mean, we know she plays the game and now there's
basically. He got married. And Zach was in a car accident. I don't know if that's why he wasn't at the wedding, but she, you know, she got married to Adria.
Right.
And he had been, it looked like it was kind of a serious wreck, but he said he was okay. But
oh no,
yeah.
I didn't. Yeah. I mean, I saw the wedding pictures.
He posted on Instagram about it, about his, so. But.
Okay.
Listen, those are personalities. I freaking miss them. Madison Hubble was, in a world where every girl is so politically correct and polite, from that Marina's Way of a Canton school, right? Maya Shibutani, Madison Chalk, Meryl Davis, Tanith Belbin, Tessa Virtue, ask them their favorite color, and I think they might say, I think every color has its strengths.
Right. Yeah.
You know, I really enjoy what each one brings to the overall picture. And then you have Madison Hubble. I mean, what a gem. I mean, she's
living out loud.
Living out loud.
That wedding looked fun. That was the wedding I would have wanted to have gone to.
In Spain, yes. So Doug Rosano got married, I think, in Ireland the week before. So, and Adam Rapon, Doug Rosano, and Adam Rapon officiated the wedding.
Oh,
if you're in the TV world, he is on Stars on Mars on the Fox network, where they sent them all to Australia, and William Shatner is giving them like. It's sort of like Big Brother, but they're surviving on Mars, and William Shatner is like the one who's giving them all of the different tasks for the week.
You know, Dave, I have not watched this program.
Yeah, and I didn't make you watch it. I tried to watch it, the first episode, I couldn't do it.
Okay.
And Lance Armstrong is on the show, and one of the other D-list celebrities thought that Lance Armstrong was Neil Armstrong. Okay.
Better that than Louis Armstrong, I guess. Yeah, okay.
Oh man.
Funny. Oh, funny.
Yeah. But you know what I am watching? Which it's really fascinating. If you take, there's one character, her name is Sabrina, who does everything for the camera. And she's like she's like watching someone join a reality show, and they've watched a lot of reality shows and studied it. But the actual intensity of the women who are in the pro-am like ballroom dance world, who are competing against each other every week, and their backstories is so fascinating on that show Dancing Queens, that if you could just edit out the parts that are blatantly for reality TV of this one character,
so much, yeah,
it would be the greatest reality show. One dancer who's apparently like really great, but then she put on weight, and she feels like that if it weren't like a competition about how sexy someone looked, that she would win all the time. Then you have someone that's such a perfectionist that she didn't go to one of the competitions because she was like too intense and she was hiding out, and then she eventually did go.
Where do you watch this? What platform?
I watch it on Peacock. I mean, it's on Bravo, but it's worth a watch.
And what's it called? Dancing Queens?
Dancing Queens. I mean, the intensity is so similar to adult skating. And I said that, and then Lois Elfman was like tweeting back, and then she's like, well, some people say adult skating is very supportive. And I'm like, well, it is, but there are some like
So
very
intensely supportive. Yeah.
Listen, Michael Rubke against Eric Bellardi. I'm watching that every year. Okay, like,
A mile rivalry. Yeah.
that is a rivalry. They are both in California. They are both good skaters. They are competitive. I think they had the same coach at one point. I'm watching it. All right, like firm. Like, and then they compete against this guy Demis. I'm like, we are just sitting and watching. Okay,
Yeah.
Dancing Queens is like that. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'll watch it.
Oh, yeah. Judge, you got to do it. Okay, you got to do it. We could discuss the personalities. It is, and then just do it.
Back in the day, it was an old Australian spoof movie called Strictly Ballroom.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, it was so camp, and in the day, I just thought it was like the funniest thing. You can't dance your own steps. You're like, oh my gosh.
I'm here for it. Okay, this is, but it's literally, it would be the best show if not for this one character. And she has such natural, she's so irritating. I mean, if this show were more popular, she'd be getting hate mail. I can't, she is not going to receive positive comments from this at all. Okay. So she may be the most hated reality TV contestant in a long time.
I'm not saying something. Okay.
But it is really, I mean, when you're cleaning, put it on in the background. Okay. Yeah. So it's worth a watch. Is anyone else watching Dancing Queens? Oh, and we have that Rory Flack show that's going to start in a couple weeks.
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
Distant relative of Roberta, who was one of my favorite singers of all time, Roberta Flack.
And remember, she's Rory Flack on the old videos. I was putting some old like 86 nationals on Patreon, and Rory Flack was competing in the junior ladies and doing quite well. So, yeah.
And I remember from those pro competitions where she was always Rory Berghardt or Rory Flack Berghardt or whatever with Keegan's coach, because he was married to her for a while. Yeah.
She did the backflip and the split jump, and man, an original. So.
She had some gimmicks. She was fun.
Old and edgy and sexy, everybody.